was lying on the cell floor and he was crying, and he was very upset.
My name is Ted Bundy. I've never spoken to anybody about this. I was an inwardly troubled boy, and nobody seemed to notice.
He's one evil so-and-so.
Innocent, vulnerable, in need of love and care and attention.
She's an evil cow.
She's got the devil in her. She's the devil itself.
Ted told me in that interview that he killed over 100 people.
Number 5. Ted Bundy. May 6th, 1975. The sun shone bright, but for 12-year-old Lynette, it cast shadows of terror. Ted Bundy, the charming grad with a psychology degree, lured her with promises of a ride home. Innocence shattered as he revealed his true nature, a culprit in disguise. Brutalized and drowned in a hotel bathtub, Lynette became another tragic victim of Bundy's dark desires.
He told me that he knew about the death of my girlfriend. The first time I'd heard that from Ted. So that obviously upset me greatly.
Bundy wasn't your run-of-the-mill monster. Handsome and educated.
He could be the guy next door. Your fiancé, your husband, your boyfriend, your lover. And then that evening, by his own determination, at his own discretion, transform himself into perhaps the most diabolical killer we've ever known.
First person he killed was a young boy when they were playing some kind of sex game in the woods. And so he must have been only 12, 13, or 14.
From Washington to across state lines, he cruised for prey. His method was sinisterly simple: offer a ride, deliver a blow, and unleash unspeakable horrors.
The driver leaned over and rolled down the passenger window and asked me if I'd like a ride.
Victims left discarded, their lives stolen in a heartbeat. Anne-Marie, just 8 years old. Catherine and Kimberly, teenagers with futures snuffed out.
Bundy killed more people in more states than anyone we've ever heard of.
Bundy's appetite for destruction knew no bounds. What baffled authorities and horrified the public was Bundy's calm demeanor when recounting his atrocities. A chilling detachment that defied comprehension. Justice eventually caught up with Bundy in 1978.
It is further ordered that on such scheduled date that you be put to death by a current of electricity sufficient to cause you immediate death.
His facade crumbled in court, exposing the true face of evil beneath the charm. And on January 24, 1989, the electric chair hummed its final judgment. Bundy's end was a reckoning, a solemn closure for the innocent souls who never saw justice served until that fateful day. Number 4. Ian Brady and Myra Henley.
Quite intelligent young girl.
Very devious.
Plodding through life in the 60s.
In 1961, Ian and Myra's paths crossed, sparking a love that quickly turned into an intense obsession. Myra fell hard for Ian, so much so that she would do anything to keep him happy. And what did Ian want? The perfect slaying. It sounds insane, but love makes people do crazy things. On July 12, 1963, their twisted mission began.
Myra said that Ian picked him up for gay sex. They brought Edward Evans back, and the next and most interesting thing about this death, and the thing that actually stops the whole cycle of killing, is that Ian told Myra to go and fetch David Smith.
Myra, behind the wheel of a van, and Ian, trailing on a motorcycle, hunted for their first victim. They found 16-year-old Pauline Reed, who was on her way to a dance.
Myra was arrested and charged a few days after Ian. Her dog, Puppet, was also taken into custody.
Luring her into the van, they drove her back to their apartment where Ian attacked her and Myra slit her throat. This was just the start. Their slaying spree continued, claiming the lives of John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey, and Edward Evans. Each slaying was as brutal as the last, driven by their dark bond. But their reign of terror ended after the slaying of Evans.
Myra went and brought David Smith and brought him back to the house, whereupon Edward Evans was murdered in a very, very brutal fashion. He was much bigger, it was much harder to kill him, there was blood everywhere. It was a very, very nasty death.
The police finally caught up with Ian and Myra, arresting them and dragging them to court. The judge handed down multiple life sentences, ensuring they'd never walk free again. Years later, on November 15th, 2002, Myra died of bronchial pneumonia.
A conjunction of people came together in Myra's life. She had a solicitor who was saying to her, unless you make a clean breast of everything, admit it.
Ian, however, lingered on, passing away from restrictive pulmonary disease on May 15th, 2017. Their story is a chilling reminder of how far obsession can push people, even to the brink of madness and slaying. Before Myra's demise, she gave an interview, hinting at the remorse and horror that had shadowed her final days. Number 3. Albert Fish.
Fish's story and Fish himself seemed to be like the flesh and blood incarnation of all of these kinds of fairy tale monsters.
Albert Fish was born on May 19, 1870 in Washington, D.C. His family had a long history of mental illness. His father passed away while he was still a toddler, and his mother placed him in an orphanage when he was still very young. But while in that orphanage, Albert Fish was tortured and intimately molested. By age 12, he began to enjoy this torture.
You are so fascinated and terrified and titillated by when you're a child. The harm. It's like the witch in Hansel and Gretel or something.
2 years later, Albert left the orphanage and was reunited with his mother. By the age of 20, due to his traumatic past, Albert became a body worker, and at the same time, he grew a fetish for sensually abusing minors from 5 years of age and below. Albert also used to abuse himself. He would insert needles and nails of a specific length into his abdomen and in his groin. But one of his worst crimes came in 1928 when he slayed, cooked, and ate an 8-year-old girl who went by the name Grace Budd. Albert was close to her family and pretended to invite the little girl to a birthday of his niece. But in that dark reality there was no niece, and Albert did an evil deed. After that, he even wrote a sadistic letter to the girl's mother describing in detail what he had done to the poor girl.
My dear Mrs. Budd, I call on you at 406 West 15th Street. Brought you pot cheese, strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat in my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her.
Fish's trial for the slaying of Grace Budd began on March 11th, 1935. Fish pleaded insanity and claimed to have heard voices from God telling him to slay children. Several psychiatrists testified about Fish's fetishes, which included sadism and masochism. But they found him to be sane and guilty, and the judge sentenced the defendant to demise by electrocution. Fish is said to have helped the executioner position the electrodes on his body, and rumor has it he enjoyed this as the ultimate sensual thrill. Number 2. Dennis Nilsen.
My name is Dennis Nielsen.
On the journey to the police station, I was asked,
"Are we talking about one body or two?"
I immediately replied, 15 or 16.
A notorious figure from the late 1970s and early 1980s, Dennis Nilsen was a Scottish serial slayer who preyed on young men. Born in Fraserburgh, Scotland, in 1945, Nilsen's life took a dark turn as he struggled with his homo desires and loneliness.
I was an inwardly troubled boy, and nobody seemed to notice.
His crimes, which began with the slaying of his first victim in 1978, escalated horrifically over the years. Before his arrest, Nilsen lived a disturbing double life. By day, he worked mundane jobs and seemed unremarkable, but by night, he would lure young men, often vulnerable and homeless, to his home. There, he carried out his gruesome acts, sometimes keeping their corpses for disturbingly long periods. What's chilling about Nilsen's story is how he eventually confessed. After a gruesome discovery in 1983, human remains clogging the drains of his London apartment, police confronted him. Rather than deny or evade, Nilsen calmly admitted to his slaying spree. He didn't just confess,
When I was back of the police car, heading to the police station at the moment of my arrest, they asked me how many there were, and I didn't really know. I just gave them a figure. And because I was cooperating with the police, I decided I'll stick with it.
He provided detailed accounts of slaying and dismembering at least 12 young men. His eerie willingness to share these gruesome details stunned investigators and the public alike. Nilsen's case remains one of the most chilling in criminal history, not just for the brutality of his crimes, but for his matter-of-fact confession that revealed the depths of his depravity. His eventual conviction and life sentence without parole underscored the severity of his actions and the closure sought by his victims' families and survivors. Number 1. Robert Black.
Tied her hands. Found a sticky plaster. Put the plaster over her mouth. Put that pillowcase or whatever it was, like cushion cover over her head.
Infamous as a serial slayer of young girls, Robert Black left a chilling legacy of terror across the UK. Born in 1947, his troubled upbringing saw him bounced between foster families and care homes, where he suffered exploitation. His deviant behavior began early. At 16, he was charged for attacking a young girl, a disturbing foreshadowing of his future crimes. Black's life took a sinister turn as he became a delivery driver, a job that facilitated his heinous acts. Between 1981 and 1986, he abducted and slayed at least 4 young girls.
Put her into the sleeping bag. I just slung it in the car.
Though suspicions link him to many more disappearances across Europe, his methodical approach and ability to evade capture for years added to the horror. How did they finally nab him? In 1990, a neighbor saw him trying to snatch a kid. Cops swooped in, and in his van they find a terrified 6-year-old girl. That bus cracked open the floodgates. See, Black spilled it all. Confessed to snuffing out at least 4 young lives, maybe more. His chilling details, how he did it, where he hid the bodies, sent shivers down spines. Black's passing away in 2016, at age 68, marked the end of a dark chapter. Despite his demise from a heart attack in prison, his crimes continue to haunt the families of his victims.